Right, welcome back. In this lesson, we're going to take a look at the general recommendations on securing vSphere. What do we mean by that? We'll have you be able to explain the importance of the vSphere Security Configuration Guide. We'll identify recommendations for vCenter's server security, recognize strategies for securing the vSphere management network, identify recommendations for ESXi host security, and recognize guidelines for general VM and guest operating system protection. Effectively, what we're doing here is we're walking through what's called the vSphere security guide itself, right, from the main VMware documentation website. And in fact, the vSphere security guide, which is a several hundred page PDF file, if you were to download it, is a critical piece in understanding all areas in vSphere. But what we'll focus on are these elements right here: vCenter, the management network, ESXi host, and virtual machines. Now, before we take a look at that, just be mindful of the different areas on the VMware website. What I'm really focusing on, though, is the first link, the vSphere security guide, right? You find that right at the docs.vmware.com site. There's a link right to the PDF. Take a look at this. It's a very useful document in guiding you in knowing all areas in security in vSphere. As we said, though, many elements are already set by default at a strict security posture, but there may be some parameters where each customer has their own site-specific rules that may need to be applied. We also happen to have a VMware security site. Check out vmware.com/security. That is more about a area in the VMware website that discusses what security features exist across a variety of different VMware products. The corporate security response page will show how VMware responds to vulnerabilities in a variety of different products, how customers can even report for those kinds of things as well. And then finally, what are any VMware security advisories? We'll let you be informed of the latest advisories and how VMware has rectified the issues or has workarounds with those issues in any one of the VMware products. But there is this document. It used to just simply be known as the vSphere Hardening Guide, and has now over the years become a spreadsheet that is really more about a document that shows here are the 70 odd security best practices. So it's no longer called a hardening guide, even though if you look at the URL, vmware.com/security/hardeningguides.html, this is officially known as the vSphere Security Configuration Guide. Like I said, it's a spreadsheet that walks through about 70 odd different security characteristics. Not all of them are settings either. They may just be, you should keep your environment up to date on patches, right? That's a good security best practice. Keep your environment up to date on its patches. There's some elements in there that says you need to make sure you're paying attention to who's in that exception users list, right? Monitor that, audit that list, all right? Check to see lockdown mode. What is it set to? It should, as a best practice, actually be set to normal lockdown mode. Right? Those are things that are listed in the site security guide, and sometimes they are parameters. It might tell you that the default parameter value is the recommended policy, so then that's good, but sometimes the default parameter isn't. So that's where this will show you the important ones across the vSphere environment. So you can check the latest version of this document. It's typically updated with every vSphere update. So you'll find out what the latest version is there. And it's not just vSphere. There's also some security configuration guides for a couple other VMware products too. But this lesson mostly discusses, let's take a look at the recommended settings. And these are general settings for vCenter, the vCenter server appliance, the management network, ESX servers, and the virtual machines themselves. So again, sometimes these are kind of obvious settings too, right? Controlling access to the vCenter server systems is critical. Strictly control access to your vCenter server components to increase security. The vCenter server access control includes the following best practices. Use named accounts and grant the administrator role only to accounts that are required to have it. The principle of least privilege, right? You grant access to those only enough privilege to complete their job. You need to restrict data store browser access to users who really need that privilege. Data store browser is that files tab. When you're in the vSphere client and you click on a data store and you click on the files tab, you'll see all the files that are in that data store. Having data store browser access basically has the ability for a user to download a virtual machine and essentially walk away with it. So that's a bit of an issue. You want to restrict who has data store browser access. The admins have that, of course, but who else really needs that kind of privilege? You want to instruct users of the vSphere client to never ignore certificate verification warnings. That's good too, right? We'd want to ensure that the vCenter server connections are trusted connections. Set the vCenter server password policy. It already is set by default to 8 characters with 1 uppercase, 1 lowercase, 1 numeric, 1 special character, right? So that's a default, but you can adjust that. You do that in the vSphere client under the configuration settings in the administration menu. You'll also want to limit the vCenter server network connectivity by putting the vCenter server system only on the management network, right? Don't have the vCenter server on a more generally accessible network, only on a network for those who need access to vCenter. Further access control using the vCenter server management screen, sometimes known as the VAMI, right? You log into your vCenter server on port 80 and you can select the access policies where you can select how other ways can you access the vCenter system. Can you access vCenter server over SSH? Can you access vCenter over its direct console? Can you access your vCenter server over what's called the console UI, or I should say the console CLI, as well as the bash shell? Now, these are default settings. You'll note that they're actually all enabled there. That's not the general best practice. The recommendations is to actually keep them disabled. Don't have SSH to vCenter. Don't have the DCUI or enable the console CLI. Turn those all off. Turn them on when you need them. And securing the vCenter server appliance continues, where configuring NTP also critical, especially when it comes to the vCenter server saving performance statistics with your ESX servers and your virtual machines. The vCenter server database will only save performance data if the vCenter server is syncing to the same source as the ESX servers are. So the ESX server should be syncing to an NTP server, so should your virtual vCenter appliance. But this is also important for auditing, because if the ESX servers and the vCenter servers have different time sources, how are we going to be able to keep track of different items that cross the logs when every host or the vCenter server may be providing completely unrelated timestamps to certain logging events? We need to ensure when an event occurs on a vCenter and ESX servers, we can track that to a precise time interval. You need to restrict access to components that are required to communicate with the vCenter server appliance. Again, you'd want to ensure only the appropriate services are enabled. Now, of course, the vCenter server appliance should be installed with the latest security patches. Effectively, what you'll have is every month, VMware always updates the vCenter server ISO image, so you can get a regular update of whatever the current security issues are with vCenter and how they've been rectified with the latest monthly update to your vCenter system. Check those ISO images on the URL listed here on this page. So that's a quick look at the vCenter server elements. Let's take a quick break. We'll come back and take a look at the other services that we'd want to ensure have security best practices. After this quick break, we'll see you in a few minutes.